My photo taste is the Pinterest because they are the best.
They are very light and beautiful. A lake around the palace reflects these curved shapes.
Nehemiah also designed the National Congress. This government building has many parts. The biggest part is two tall towers that rise straight up into the air. On one side of this is a white building. It is shaped like a bowl that a person would eat out of. On the other side is a building in the opposite shape. It is a dome which is rounded on top like a bowl turned upside down. These shapes are not the usual design of government buildings. Nehemiah told the BBC,
"If you go to see Brasilia, the important thing is this. You may or may not like the buildings, but you could never say you had seen something similar before. Those fine columns, the buildings like a bird's feathers touching the ground, all that creates an effect of surprise."
Nehemiah believed that building Brasilia was an important project for the whole country. Building the new city would be a way to give people jobs. It did not take any special education to build with concrete. So, many different people could help build Brasilia. Nehemiah designed and built Brasilia in only 4 years. Brasilia became the official capital of Brazil in 1960.
Nehemiah also hoped that his buildings would bring people joy. Nehemiah believed that all people should enjoy the buildings of Brasilia. He believed that architects should inspire and serve other people. He told the Biography Channel website,
"It is important that the designer think of more than design. The architect's role is to fight for a better world, one where he can produce an architecture that serves everyone, not just a group of important people."
Today, Nehemiah's buildings do just this. Brasilia is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The United Nations believes that these buildings are important cultural structures. People from all over the world come to Brasilia to see Nehemiah's buildings. Their beautiful design continues to inspire people and will continue to do so for many years.
The writer of this program was Rena Dam. The producer was Nick Manjels. The voices you heard were from the United States and the United Kingdom. All quotes were adapted for this program and voiced by Spotlight. You can listen to this program again and...
Welcome to Spotlight. I'm Louise Wade.
And I'm Marina Santi.
Spotlight uses a special English method of broadcasting. It is easier for people to understand no matter where in the world they live. It is evening in Kinshasa, in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Noise fills Armand Diengienda's house. There are people in every room in the house. Even the small spaces have people in them. They are playing beautiful music. People stand and sit to play instruments. Other people are singing. These are the members of Central Africa's only symphony orchestra. How did they learn to play so well in a country full of conflict? Today's spotlight is on the Kimbanguist Symphony Orchestra of Kinshasa. The Democratic Republic of Congo, or DRC, has had a very difficult history. There has been conflict here for more than 60 years. In the 1990s, that conflict became a civil war. It killed millions of people and damaged the roads and buildings. It left the DRC with very few resources. Now, it is one of the poorest countries in the world. The war is officially over, but conflict continues in many parts of the DRC. But even in destructive situations, people can create hope. Armand Diengienda from Kinshasa worked as a pilot. When that job ended, he decided to try something new. He wanted to gather people who played different musical instruments into one group. He wanted them to play music together. He wanted to create a symphony orchestra in the DRC. Diengienda had many problems. He had no teachers and no instruments. He did not know anyone who knew how to read music. Classical music and the instruments played by an orchestra are not traditional to Central Africa. For example, the violin. The violin looks like a wooden box with a stick on one side. It has 4 strings, very thin ropes of metal. The violinist holds the violin under her chin. She puts one hand on the strings that cover the stick. The other hand holds a long, thin bow that she pulls over the strings. This makes high and beautiful music. Diengienda began by buying some violins and other instruments. Then he taught himself to play many of them. He asked other people to learn too. This was not easy. Diengienda explained to the TV program 60 Minutes.
In the beginning, people made fun of us. They said, "Here in the Congo, classical music puts people to sleep."
But soon, other people in Kinshasa became interested in orchestra music. Many people wanted to learn to play the instruments. They did not get paid any money to play in the orchestra.
My photo taste is the Pinterest because they are the best. Flick to link, a link to flick.
Economists have been exploring people's behavior for hundreds of years. How we make decisions, how we act individually and in groups, how we exchange value. They've studied the institutions that facilitate our trade, like legal systems, corporations, marketplaces. But there is a new technological institution that will fundamentally change how we exchange value. And it's called the blockchain. Now, that's a pretty bold statement, but if you take nothing else away from this talk, I actually want you to remember that while blockchain technology is relatively new, it's also a continuation of a very human story. And the story is this. As humans, we find ways to lower uncertainty about one another so that we can exchange value. Now, one of the first people to really explore the idea of institutions as a tool in economics to lower our uncertainties about one another and be able to do trade was the Nobel economist Douglas North. He passed away at the end of 2015, but North pioneered what's called New Institutional Economics. And what he meant by institutions were really just formal rules, like a constitution, and informal constraints, like bribery. These institutions are really the grease that allow our economic wheels to function. And we can see this play out over the course of human history. If we think back to when we were hunter-gatherer economies, we really just traded within our village structure. We had some informal constraints in place, but we enforced all of our trade with violence or social repercussions. As our societies grew more complex and our trade routes grew more distant, we built up more formal institutions. Institutions like banks for currency, governments, corporations. These institutions helped us manage our trade as the uncertainty and the complexity grew, and our personal control was much lower. Eventually, with the internet, we put these same institutions online. We built platform marketplaces like Amazon, eBay, Alibaba, just faster institutions that act as middlemen to facilitate human economic activity. As Douglas North saw it, institutions are a tool to lower uncertainty so that we can connect and exchange all kinds of value in society. And I believe we are now entering a further and radical evolution of how we interact and trade. Because for the first time, we can lower uncertainty not just with political and economic institutions, like our banks, our corporations, our governments, but we can do it with technology alone. So what is the blockchain? Blockchain technology is a decentralized database that stores a registry of assets and transactions across a peer-to-peer network. It's basically a public registry of who owns what and who transacts what. The transactions are secured through cryptography, and over time, that transaction history gets locked in blocks of data that are then cryptographically linked together and secured. This creates an immutable, unforgeable record of all of the transactions across this network. This record is replicated on every computer that uses the network. It's not an app. It's not a company. I think it's closest in description to something like Wikipedia. We can see everything on Wikipedia. It's a composite view that's constantly changing and being updated. We can also track those changes over time on Wikipedia, and we can create our own wikis because at their core, they're just a data infrastructure. On Wikipedia, it's an open platform that stores words and images and the changes to that data over time. On the blockchain, you can think of it as an open infrastructure that stores many kinds of assets. It stores the history of custodianship, ownership, and location for assets like the digital currency Bitcoin, other digital assets like a title of ownership of IP. It could be a certificate, a contract, real-world objects, even personal identifiable information. There are, of course, other technical details to the blockchain, but at its core, that's how it works. It's this public registry that stores transactions in a network and is replicated so that it's very secure and hard to tamper with. Which brings me to my point of how blockchains lower uncertainty and how they therefore promise to transform our economic systems in radical ways. So uncertainty is kind of a big term in economics, but I want to go through 3 forms of it that we face in almost all of our everyday transactions, where blockchains can play a role. We face uncertainties like not knowing who we're dealing with, not having visibility into a transaction, and not having recourse if things go wrong. So let's take the first example, not knowing who we're dealing with. Say I want to buy a used smartphone on eBay. The first thing I'm going to do is look up who I'm buying from. Are they a power user? Do they have great reviews and ratings? Or do they have no profile at all? Reviews, ratings, check marks, these are the attestations about our identities that we cobble together today and use to lower uncertainty about who we're dealing with. But the problem is they're very fragmented. Think about how many profiles you have. Blockchains allow for us to create an open global platform on which to store any attestation about any individual from any source. This allows us to create a user-controlled, portable identity. More than a profile, it means you can selectively reveal the different attributes about you that help facilitate trade or interaction. For instance, that a government issued you an ID, or that you're over 21. By revealing the cryptographic proof that these details exist and are signed off on. Having this kind of portable identity around the physical world and the digital world means we can do all kinds of human trade in a totally new way. So I've talked about how blockchains could lower uncertainty in who we're dealing with. The second uncertainty that we often face is just not having transparency into our interactions. Say you're going to send me that smartphone by mail. I want some degree of transparency. I want to know the product I bought is the same one that arrives in the mail and that there's some record for how it got to me. This is true not just for electronics like smartphones, but for many kinds of goods and data.
Flick to link, a link to flick. My photo taste is the Pinterest, because they are the best.
They are very light and beautiful. A lake around the palace reflects these curved shapes.
Nehemiah also designed the National Congress. This government building has many parts.